Story 1. I've worked as a nurse in multiple hospitals and care facilities. Before the current hospital I work at, I was employed at a long-term elder care center about a half hour from my home. I had experience working with older patients before, so this was nothing new to me. I'd only been working at this facility for a couple of weeks, and you'll soon understand why. This was my second to last shift there, though I didn't know it at the time. I was working the overnight shift, running on negative hours of sleep. I'd been assigned to the memory care unit. The residents there absolutely adored me. As a young woman in her 20s among people largely left to drift in their own minds, I think they saw me as a breath of fresh air, someone who could gently tether them to the present. When you're alone with your thoughts, your mind can wander anywhere, but another person's presence anchors you to that moment. That night, I was caring for several patients, but one stood out as especially restless. Her name was Clara. It was my first time tending to her, and every time I entered her room, she'd insist she was hearing voices and seeing a man dressed in black standing in the corner. The other woman sharing her room had asked for the privacy curtain to be closed before my shift began, so Clara wouldn't disturb her. She was sweet, always smiled when I came by, but rarely spoke and was deeply forgetful. Most residents were asleep by 11 p.m., but not Clara. Each time she called me in, she was visibly frightened by the voices and the silent figure watching her from the shadows. Honestly, it unnerved me a little too. I believed these were real to her, hallucinations born of her condition, and I felt for her. I could only imagine how terrifying that must feel. Still, I did my best to soothe her without turning on the TV, out of respect for her roommate. I held Clara's hands and whispered, "It's okay, just breathe, you're safe." I reminded her she wasn't alone, that I was just a call button away. That seemed to help. She relaxed, and the next time I checked in, she was finally asleep. Once the unit quieted down, time seemed to slow, almost crawl backward. An hour or two later, I was alone in the supply closet, restocking my cart. It was a small, windowless room, and I'd closed the door for quiet. So when I heard a sound inside, it startled me. I turned, saw nothing, and went back to work. Then I felt it, a firm, unmistakable hand on my shoulder. I spun around, screamed, but there was no one there, nothing on my shoulder. The room was empty. I stepped into the hallway just to check. No other staff in sight. Silence. I finished loading my cart, turned toward the door, and froze. My heart shot into my throat. Outside the small window in the door stood a man in black, staring in at me, smiling. My scream echoed through the entire wing. He vanished from view instantly. Seconds later, the door opened, and a fellow nurse rushed in, helping me off the floor as I shook uncontrollably. "Did you see him?" I gasped. "The man in black." She frowned. "What man? There's no one here." We searched every room. No strangers, no one in black. My scream had woken Clara. When I entered her room, she was wide-eyed, talking about the screams, not realizing they'd been mine. I asked her to describe the man in black again, specifically whether he'd been smiling. She looked at me, her expression suddenly sharp and focused in a way I hadn't seen all night. Her eyebrows drew down. "How did you know?" she whispered. My pulse skipped. Then she began screaming, "Get me out of here. He's coming." Other nurses rushed in to calm her. I was reassigned to another wing that night, and I ended up leaving early, too shaken to continue. The next day, I texted the head nurse to say my upcoming shift would be my last, that the experience had deeply traumatized me, and I couldn't return to that building. She replied kindly, understandingly. I've never been diagnosed with any mental health condition, nor have I ever experienced hallucinations. I know sleep deprivation can warp perception, but this felt different. The pressure on my shoulder, the smiling figure behind the glass, matching exactly what Clara had described all night. This was one of those rare, unexplainable moments, something I can only call supernatural. And honestly, I hope it stays a once-in-a-lifetime event. Story 2. 3 years ago, I came down with bacterial meningitis. I live in a coastal city in the southeastern US. There wasn't any known outbreak, so I still don't know how or from whom I contracted it. Symptoms hit hard: crushing headaches, confusion, extreme drowsiness, nausea, and zero appetite. But when the hallucinations started, I knew this was serious. I was home alone, my husband at work, when I heard a child's voice call, "Mom," from downstairs. We don't have children. I dragged myself out of bed, peered over the banister, and called my husband's name. No answer, of course. The pain from standing was so intense, I crawled back to bed. Then I heard it again. "Hello," from the first floor. Panicked, I called my husband, sobbing that I was hearing a child's voice inside our house, and feared I was hallucinating. He heard the terror in my voice and left work immediately to take me to the ER. While waiting for him, I changed clothes, but had to rush to the bathroom to vomit. Midway through, I heard another voice, muffled, indistinct, coming from just outside the bathroom door. I couldn't tell if it was the same voice or something new. I truly felt like I was losing my mind. At the hospital, I was diagnosed with bacterial meningitis. The doctor said it could have been fatal if untreated, and that while hallucinations aren't common with this illness, they're not unheard of. I was started on IV antibiotics right away and told I'd need to stay several days. My husband stayed with me for a few hours before heading home around 10 p.m. since he had work the next morning. The night nurse told me to call if anything felt wrong. Exhausted, I fell into a heavy, feverish sleep. I dreamed my ex-husband was standing over my bed, speaking softly. He insulted my current husband, patted my head, and said, "I'm glad you're okay." I came as soon as I saw he left. Then he muttered that he hated my husband and wanted to kill him. He stroked my forehead and walked out. Given our history, our marriage ended due to his emotional abuse and controlling behavior. It wasn't unusual for me to dream about him. But this felt different. I woke up groggy and disoriented. A chair had been pulled up to my bedside, empty. It hadn't been there when my husband left. Still half asleep, I drifted off again. The next morning, I mentioned the vivid dream to the nurse. She paused, then said, "That wasn't a dream. Someone visited you last night, said he was your cousin Marcus." I froze. I don't have a cousin Marcus, and I don't have any relatives in this state. She grew serious. He signed in as Marcus, claimed to be family. Marcus was my ex-husband's name. After clarifying, the doctor explained that the antibiotics, combined with the infection, likely caused delirium, blurring the line between sleep and wakefulness. That's why the visit felt so real. I texted Marcus, "Why were you at the hospital? How did you even know I was there?" He didn't reply at first. After I followed up, mentioning the threats he'd made, he responded, "I never threatened anyone. I just came to check on you. You must have dreamed it." I told him to stay out of my life, or I'd involve the police. He never replied again. I never told my husband about the threats. Between the meningitis, the hallucinations the day before, and the medication-induced delirium, I couldn't be sure what was real. Maybe I heard things that weren't said, or maybe I didn't. I was discharged the following week and still wonder about that night. Story 3. I once matched with a woman on a dating app, Sabrina, who I'm still friends with today. She seemed cool from the start. Tattoos covering her left arm, red streaks in her dark hair, and a bio that said she loved hiking and urban exploration. One of her photos showed her on a rooftop with a stunning cityscape behind her. I asked where it was. She said it was an old, abandoned medical complex on the outskirts of town, easy to sneak into at night, with amazing views. There's usually one security guard circling the parking lot, she added, but it's easy to slip past him. She suggested we explore it together, our first date, if you could call it that. I thought it sounded adventurous, a fun alternative to the usual coffee or drinks. I picked her up from her apartment, and we drove about 20 minutes to the edge of the city. During the drive, we chatted and got comfortable with each other, laughing, sharing stories. It felt promising. When we arrived, she directed me to park on a quiet side street, hidden by overgrown shrubs, a short walk from the building's rear entrance. We hopped a low fence, darted across the empty lot, and approached a basement window she said was always broken. It was eerie, but I'd agreed to this. I'd even worn old jeans like she'd suggested, knowing I'd probably tear them. We used only our phone flashlights, no special gear. Sabrina moved like she knew every hallway, leading me confidently up a stairwell into the main floors. Being alone with someone in a derelict building at night was already unnerving. But what came next was far worse. On the first floor, Sabrina was talking loudly, and I kept shushing her, worried we'd attract attention. Then we both heard it, a distant creak, like a door opening, echoing down the corridor. She went quiet. "Is it normal for other people to be here?" I whispered. "Sometimes," she said, "but not really." We turned off our lights and waited. Then bang, much closer. We bolted in the dark, stumbling back to the stairs, then racing upward. A few floors up, we caught our breath. "Cops don't come inside," she said. But whoever that was, they weren't using a light. No one sane walks around in total darkness. Then we heard footsteps coming up the same stairwell. We ran again. Sabrina led us through a labyrinth of hallways until we reached a small outdoor ledge, a partial rooftop on an upper floor. We sat on a concrete pillar, legs dangling over a 10-foot drop into an empty atrium below, catching our breath. That's when we heard it. Footsteps directly beneath us. We shone our lights down and froze. Standing below, looking up with a calm smile, was a man in his 40s. Black beanie, black jacket, black pants. "Come on down," he said in a low, unsettling voice, waving gently. "Are you security?" I called. He ignored me, just kept smiling. "Come on down." Terrified, we scrambled back across the narrow wooden beam we'd used to reach the pillar. Halfway across, he suddenly turned and hurried out through a side door, clearly trying to cut us off. We sprinted in the opposite direction, flying down stairwells on the far side of the building. Then, above us, a door slammed open. Footsteps pounded down the steps. He'd found us. We ran like our lives depended on it. Made it to the ground floor, back to the basement, and squeezed through the broken window. As I climbed out last, I kept expecting hands to grab my ankles, but nothing happened. We lost him. We sprinted across the lot to my car, locked the doors, and just sat there, gasping. That nightmare somehow forged an instant bond between us. We drove to a late-night diner, ordered food, and talked for an hour, processing what had just happened. I dropped her off afterward. We dated briefly, but ultimately stayed close friends. And neither of us has ever gone back to that place.